happy to be here in Jackson, Mississippi.
Well, welcome. We're glad to have you.
Listen, Mississippi has made a lot of news this week. Some of it good, some of it not so good. All of it seemingly involving a former governor, Haley Barbour. What is this tar baby reference? Is this local conversation?
Well, when it comes to Haley Barbour, it's rarely just a local conversation. He seems to make national news with these kind of comments more often than not. And he seems to find himself in positions where he has to backtrack from those comments, trying to explain away something like a tar baby comment that clearly has racialized references. And the reality is, Haley Barbour is a very smart man. He understands those connotations and those connections. And so whether it was just a slip, he certainly knows the damage and the danger in using language like that. So it's really not excusable, even from a man who's now a former governor, no longer governor, but still has incredible power in this state.
Well, let's put this into some proper context. Former Governor Barbour, former chair of the Republican National Committee, was giving a post-election assessment in which he referred to President Obama's policies as tar baby policies. A lot of people take offense to that. Is that not an offensive term in Mississippi?
It's absolutely an offensive term, and Haley Barbour knows it's an offensive term, and he knows it's an offensive term because he had to come back and apologize for having made it. It's absolutely, the connotations are obvious, and that history of racist language, and racist language that can be used in both a seemingly non-racialized way, but in fact has very much racialized implications, particularly in terms of power and white power and the white hegemony as it's been used over African Americans in this state. That language is very much loaded, and he knows that.
Well, you excuse me for saying this, but there's a long history of racism in public office here in Alabama, here in Mississippi. You're so close to the heart of Dixie, here in Mississippi. And it's surprising to me that Mr. Barbour, at the same time that he is caught in this conflict, is also, you've given him support, credit, for supporting the creation of the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum.
Absolutely. I mean, we have this dual history in the state of Mississippi where and Haley Barbour is kind of at the center of this, where you see that he represents a form of power that certainly isn't that far distant from the Jim Crow regimes of the 1960s, and a type of conservatism really that has evolved directly from segregationists of the 60s and 70s. And at the same time, he was the person behind that really pushed the enabling legislation for what would be the first state-funded civil rights museum in the nation, a museum that's going to be world-class, that has the leading black architect today in the world, really, and Phil Freeline as the chief architect on the building. It's going to be an incredible world-class institution, and he was the one behind it. Now, why did he do that? That's the question. Why was he the one behind the Civil Rights Museum, and why does he deserve that credit? Well, he was the one behind it, some people say, because it also came shortly after another slip that he had when he made his comments about the Citizens Council in Yazoo City not really being such a nefarious organization, which we actually, in fact, know that the Citizens Council was notoriously a racist organization bent on maintaining white power. And some people say, well, he pushed it just to, as a mea culpa, to say, I'm sorry for, and apologize for having made those comments, especially in the context of his considering a presidential run.
But do these apologies also come because there's a duality that exists in Mississippi politics, particularly a state where you have a significant black population, and politicians, local politicians, have to play to that reality at the same time that if you're a Republican in a southern state, you have to play to another reality as well?
Well, I think they come in part because of that, in part because we have the most black elected officials of any state in the nation, which is true, which is a product of the Voting Rights Act and the power of the Voting Rights Act. But I also think it comes from the likes of Haley Barbour when you see someone who also has power on a national level. And in some ways, it's a story straight out of the civil rights movement, because when civil rights activists were able to provoke racist incidents, when they were able, through nonviolent direct action in particular, to provoke violence. In the case of Alabama Bull Connor, we think of fire hoses and police dogs. You had media intervention and media attention, which led to national attention, which led to federal intervention, and required some change to happen. To a certain extent, I think this is a similar story with Haley Barbour, who has power on a national level and makes these mistakes. And I think what you're seeing is a racism that's embedded in his consciousness, that is being expressed in kind of off-the-cuff ways, that comes out, and then he has to go back and apologize, in part because of the criticism that he gets on outside of Mississippi. If this was just some local, rural white politician, you wouldn't see these kinds of apologies.
Do these stumbles, in your opinion, reflect his struggles with what I call Jim Crow Jr., or is he in fact just an old dyed-in-the-wool Ross Barnett kind of governor?
Well, so I think what you're seeing is, much as the civil rights movement never ended, it didn't just disappear in 1968. Segregationists didn't just disappear, and the conservatism of segregationists didn't just disappear. It evolved over time and began to utilize a more race-neutral kind of language, a colorblind coded kind of language that politicians like Haley Barbour very consciously adopted, and then that politics, that racialized politics that in terms of the scholarship is often referred to as colorblind politics, politics that avoids explicit issues of race but is actually all about racialized power. The success of that colorblind politics has been so effective that there are people who have internalized it and use it without even thinking, and they make these comments to a certain extent believing what they're saying. There's actually now a young generation of conservatives who've grown up in this kind of colorblind political era where they make comments and they make policies and they act in ways that have very racist implications, but they think for sure that they're not being racist.
They stumble, and then there comes the mea culpa.
That's right.
Dr. Robert Luckett, thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you for having me.